And now for some political analysis. Ramesh Ponnuru is a senior editor at the National Review, a columnist for Bloomberg View, and a visiting fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Julie Pace is the Washington bureau chief for the Associated Press. Jeffrey Goldberg is editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, and we'd like to welcome to the show Tolu Olorunnipa to the broadcast. He's a White House reporter for Bloomberg News. A lot to get to, as always, but I want to start on these chemical attacks in Syria. The president's not calling them alleged attacks. He says this is a chemical attack, and there will be a big price to pay. Jeff, what does that lead us to?
It leads us probably, if past can predict the future. A year ago, he launched 49 Tomahawk missiles at various Syrian sites. Did not have the desired effect. So it could lead us to another attack by the American military. It will not lead us to a conclusion or a satisfactory conclusion of the Syrian civil war. It's very, very late in the process. Assad and his Iranian and Russian allies have basically won this civil war. It's all over but the dying, it seems, in this one town. So I don't think that the U.S. can do anything to affect the overall outcome at this late stage. Remember, Donald Trump also said just last week, we're finished with Syria. Against the wishes of the Pentagon, he said this, by the way. He wants out. So it's an interesting moment to see how far he will go back in. He won't go back in far enough to make a difference. Right,
and those U.S. troops, the 2,000 that are there, aren't doing anything against the Assad regime.
They're there to fight ISIS, which he thinks he's won, by the way, and Donald Trump is probably being premature when he thinks that victory is at hand.
Well, this is what makes the timing of this attack so interesting, is that it comes days after Trump signaled that the U.S. was getting out. While he's not using a specific time frame publicly, he is privately telling his national security team that he wants to be out by October. That's the exact type of thing that he and Republicans criticized Barack Obama for, saying if you put a timeline on this, if you make clear to the opposition, to our foes, when we're going to be drawing out, they will respond to that. And so we don't know exactly what is behind this
Putin, Iran, and Assad have read what he said.
They know the playbook.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting, Tolu, because John Bolton will be the new national security advisor. This is happening on his watch now. This makes for a tough first day at work.
Yeah, Bolton has been a hawk on a number of issues in the Middle East, including the Iraq war. He's likely to push the president more towards taking action, striking back against the Assad regime, even though the president has seen the Middle East in the light of it being a hornet's nest that the U.S. should not get involved with, because it's this quagmire that does not produce any positive results for the U.S. So the president sort of has this duality where he wants to seem very tough. We saw him name President Putin in a tweet for the first time, sort of being critical against President Putin and his role in Syria. But at the same time, the president has said that he wants to get out of Syria. He wants to bring the troops home. And that's clear that Bolton's going to have a tough time sort of making the president have a coherent foreign policy when it comes to an area that he does not want to be in, but he also wants to seem tough.
Is there a Syria policy yet?
I mean, is there a Trump doctrine at all? I mean,
right.
it's difficult to know when he surrounds himself with so many different types of voices. He likes to have competing voices around him, and then he does make very impulsive foreign policy decisions. It makes it difficult to know whether or not there is an overall strategy behind what he's doing.
And Ramesh, I mean, conservatives really cheered the president when he took that action last year, saying, look, he's not President Obama who sets red lines and doesn't act on them. He's set out consequences for crossing his red line. Well, it appears another line has been crossed here. So is it he trapped himself?
Well, there was a split among conservatives, I'd say. I do think that there is a cost that you pay when the president says there's a big price, if he doesn't then exact that big price. I think it reduces his credibility and it reduces American credibility. But I think there's a real challenge, there's a real question about what the administration does now. And I think people are going to be surprised about John Bolton, because John Bolton has never been an enthusiast for interventions for just humanitarian reasons. He's gone sort of back and forth on the Syria question, depending on circumstances. In 2013, he was publicly against President Obama taking military action in Syria, and he said it's a strategic sideshow. So I'm not sure that he's going to live up to the caricature of being kind of a hawk's hawk on all issues.
It's interesting. He's going to be in place before we get a Secretary of State confirmed. Mike Pompeo's got those hearings coming up on Thursday. Does that in any way solidify Bolton? I mean, does a few days on the job give him more influence in any way?
Well, I think what gives him more influence on the job is he apparently has a very good relationship with President Trump. Of course, other people have started out with a good relationship and seen that deteriorate over time. But I think that this administration in particular, the relationship with the president personally matters a great deal, even more than it does in any other administration.
Jeffrey, you had a really interesting interview with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, in this past week. Now we're going to see his nemesis of sorts, the Emir of Qatar, at the White House meeting with President Trump. Are we going to see any kind of diplomatic breakthrough on that standoff between the countries?
No.
I thought that was an easy question.
Yeah. Well, I mean, who knows? But it doesn't seem very likely. The hatred between the Qatari royal family and the Saudi royal family is almost as deep as the hatred between the Saudi royal family and the leaders of Iran. The Saudis have defined for themselves and for the so-called moderate Arab wing who the enemies are: Iran, Assad, and to a lesser extent, but still important extent, the outlying Qataris. So it's very, very difficult to see Donald Trump negotiating peace between Gulf states.
But it's significant. I mean, he stood in the Rose Garden last year and said that Qatar was funding terrorism at the very highest levels, and now he's got the head of state coming to see him.
Welcome to the Middle East. I mean, you know, the Qatar also is home to important U.S. military installations.
Exactly.
And the Pentagon obviously wants us to calibrate that relationship, like it wants us to calibrate all relationships. And Donald Trump is not does not have expertise in calibrating relationships in the Middle East, or possibly in many other places. So we'll see how this meeting goes, but nothing grand is going to come out of it, I don't think.
Tolu, the president will be traveling at the end of this week to South America. Will we see a preliminary trade deal on the NAFTA front? Not China, on NAFTA.
Yeah, it's not likely that it's going to happen before this meeting or during this meeting. He's going to the Summit of Americas in Lima, Peru. They're still trying to work out the kinks of a trade deal, but the president keeps throwing grenades into the entire trade relationship by announcing new tariffs, global tariffs, trying to take on China, but at the same time really making a number of our other allies unhappy when you talk about steel tariffs and aluminum tariffs that hit not only China, but also a number of our different allies in different parts of the world, including South America. And by sending troops to the southern border, he's sort of inflaming the relationship with our trade partner in Mexico and making it more difficult to have those continued talks and reach a deal during this summit. So it's likely that we're not going to see a deal before the summit. Maybe there's some work happening behind the scenes away from the president's Twitter account and away from these very sort of incendiary moves that he's making on the border that can work itself out over the weeks to come, but not necessarily something that we're expecting to see in the next few days.
Ramesh, can conservatives convince the president to save NAFTA?
You know, this administration is full of people who support it, but it also has a lot of people who are against it. It does not speak with one voice on this issue. Trump has given us every indication for his entire adult life that he is a protectionist by conviction. And people have been trying to talk him out of each of the steps he's already taken. So I would not be confident about NAFTA survival. And I think one of the reasons you're seeing the markets react the way they're reacting, it's not each individual tariff that the president has announced is going to be so destructive, but people don't like where this is going and they're uncertain about where it's going.
Markets forward-looking indicator, and they're betting that this is going downhill.
That's right.
We got to take a commercial break. We'll be back with more from our panel in a moment.